Hague Conventions of 1907, for example. We can come back to that if you like. The post-Second World War codification of the laws of war consists primarily of the UN Charter, the Geneva Conventions, and the Nuremberg Principles, later adopted by the General Assembly. Well, as you know, I'm sure, the Charter bars the threat or use of force, except in two instances, if authorized by the Security Council of the United Nations, or under Article 51 of the Charter, in self-defense against armed attack until the Security Council acts. The phrase armed attack is conventionally interpreted in terms of Daniel Webster's principle, which extends armed attack to cases where, in his words, the necessity for action is urgent, is instant, overwhelming, and leaving no choice of means and no moment of deliberation. Any other resort to force is a war crime. In fact, the supreme international crime encompassing all the evil that follows, in the words of the Nuremberg Tribunal. There was a high-level UN panel meeting and issued its report in December 2004, included, among others, former National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft. It concluded that Article 51 needs neither extension nor restriction of its long understood scope. It should be neither rewritten nor reinterpreted. Last September, the UN World Summit reaffirmed, quoting, that the relevant provisions of the Charter are sufficient to address the full range of threats to international peace and security. The summit further endorsed the responsibility to commit ourselves to helping states build capacity to protect their populations from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity, and to assisting those which are under stress before crises and conflicts break out. The summit granted no new right of intervention to individual states or regional alliances, whether under humanitarian or other professed grounds, and it established no responsibility to protect, contrary to what was widely alleged in news reports and commentary. The high-level panel of December 2004 had reached the same conclusion in words that were specifically directed at intellectual opinion and state practice in the West in recent years. Its words were these: for those impatient with declaring Article 51 to be appropriate as formulated, the answer must be that in a world full of perceived potential threats, the risk to the global order and the norm of non-intervention on which it continues to be based is simply too great for the legality of unilateral preventive action as distinct from collectively endorsed action to be accepted. Allowing one to so act is to allow all. Allowing one to so act is to allow all. Here the panel is presupposing the principle of universality, namely that we apply to ourselves the same standards we do to others, if not more stringent ones. Now, that's perhaps the most elementary of moral truisms, and it's the foundation of just war theory, if that theory is to be taken at all seriously. The principle, however, is flatly rejected in the elite intellectual, moral, and political culture of the most powerful states, and it's explicitly rejected by official doctrine. That includes the expositors and advocates of just war theory, also includes a substantial legal literature. It's pretty easy to illustrate. There's plenty of material on print about it. Well, in this, and we can draw some conclusions from that. In this connection, may end by saying that it's worth remembering some eloquent words on the principle of universality, foundation of just war theory and any serious moral theory. Comments by Justice Robert Jackson. He was the chief of counsel for the prosecution at Nuremberg. He informed the tribunal that if certain acts of violation of treaties are crimes, they are crimes whether the United States does them or whether Germany does them. And we are not prepared to lay down a rule of criminal conduct against others which we would not be willing to have invoked against us. We must never forget that the record on which we judge these defendants is the record on which history will judge us tomorrow. To pass these defendants a poisoned chalice is to put it to our own lips as well. The supreme international crime for which the defendants were hanged at Nuremberg was defined clearly enough by Justice Jackson at Nuremberg. He proposed to the tribunal that an aggressor is a state that is the first to carry out invasion of its armed forces, with or without a declaration of war, of the territory of another state. Illustrations of that, too, are easy enough to find, and others are on the horizon. It's again noteworthy that these considerations are virtually excluded from the dominant intellectual and moral culture in the West rather generally, although we have no difficulty at all in applying them to official enemies. Well, once again, there's nothing special about our own country in this respect, except that it's more powerful than others. Such evasions with regard to the acts of one's own state are close to universal. They disfigure intellectual history as far back as you go. To the maxim of Tacitus that I quoted, we may add an observation by President John Adams: power always thinks it has a great soul and vast views beyond the comprehension of the weak. I think that's another near universal, again, all too easy to illustrate from the traditional practice of governments and the educated classes within them. Well, to return to the beginning, what can one learn from just war theory? My feeling is that from the literature on just war, we learn mostly about the prevailing moral and intellectual climate in which we live. Scientific inquiry into moral psychology and its roots in our nature may someday provide important insights, but practice cannot wait for that day any more than engineering has waited for physics or medicine for biology for centuries in these cases, which are much simpler ones and much more accessible to inquiry than human nature. Thirdly, the codification of laws of war has over time had a notable civilizing effect, but the gap between professed ideals and actual practice is much too large to be tolerated, in my opinion. Thanks.